My parents' dining room smelled like pot roast and lemon furniture polish and something else you only notice when your stomach is a fist. Old resentment. Warmed over. The piano sat in the opposite room, sun pooling on its scratched mahogany back like late forgiveness, and my sister was scrolling on her phone, thumb moving fast, mouth twisting when she saw something that wasn't about her. They had already cleared a spot on the wall for a giant framed map with red pushpins where she would go. Lisbon, Paris, Santorini. The word study had been tacked onto a trip that was mostly marketing and beaches. My mom said it like an apology. My dad said it like it was reasonable. It's practical, my dad said, carving the roast in hard, sawed strokes. It's just sitting there. No one plays it. I looked at the piano. The white keys weren't white anymore. They were tea-stained, a little translucent where the oils of our fingers had sunk in over decades. The B, above middle C, had a tiny chip on its front edge. Grandma used to tap it like knocking on a door. No one plays it, he said, while my bones remembered how the bench curved under my thighs and the way my grandmother's shoulder rocked gently with a beat, even when her fingers stopped. I do, I said. It came out flat. I wasn't there to beg. I was on a tightrope between a scream and a laugh, and in the middle, there was this steady place where words had to fit like steps. Jenna didn't look up. It's literally worth money, she said. We're not a museum. Mom was studying my face like it was a stain she couldn't quite place. She tipped her wine glass. We thought you'd understand, honey. It's a lot to maintain. It's a piano, I said. You dust it. Dad set the knife down with a clack. Don't be cute, Hannah. I stared at him, at the deep line that cut across his forehead like a permanent frown mark. He'd been a car salesman for 28 years, and he could make anything sound like a deal. He could make you feel cheap for wanting something that had nothing to do with money. My son, Leo, was at the end of the table, legs swinging. 7 years old and finally with hair again. The fuzz catching the light like a halo I wasn't allowed to think of as anything holy. He arranged his peas in 2 neat rows. He didn't look at the piano. He never bragged about being brave, and he never had to be told to say thank you. He did it like breathing. I just want to play one song before you list it, I said. Then we can talk. Aunt Carol, quiet until then, set down her fork. She sat hunched, arms tucked close, the same way she sat at hospital beds and in pews and in the front seat when she was driving through hail. She had Grandma's eyes, pale and watery and laser-sharp. She didn't smile, exactly. She gave me a look that said, finally. Please, I said, because I knew this was a fight, and I needed an open hand first. Dad sighed like I'd asked him to carry me to the piano on his back. Fine, he said. But it's not yours, Hannah. Let's not dramatize. I stood up. Every cell in my legs buzzed. The piano bench gave a small, familiar squeak. Its cushion was thin now. You could feel the wood slats through it. I lifted the fallboard, and the smell hit me. Varnish, dust, lemon oil, and something like old paper. There was a tiny dent on the left cheek block where Grandma used to rest her ring when it spun on her finger and slipped off. I put my fingers where hers had lived. They hovered for a second, and the distance between my hands and the keys felt like the height of a skyscraper. If I missed the first note, everything would tumble. I started with the note she always started with. The one that sounded like a breath before a sentence, like the place your chest loosens if you let it. I played the song Grandma wrote when I was 9. She called it the River Waltz, like she was pretending Brookfield had a river instead of a scrappy brown stream behind her fence. It was 3 chords and a melody that moved like someone learning to walk in a dream. The first time she taught it to me, she said, "It's not that it's simple. It's that it knows what it is." The note bloomed, then the next. The room narrowed to muscle memory and air. Leo went still. My mom folded a napkin into a smaller square with the kind of attention you give to a cut you're trying not to pick. My dad's jaw worked, and he stared at the map like it was a mirror. Jenna's thumb slowed. Somewhere, behind me, Aunt Carol let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it since 2003. The river waltz didn't try to impress you. It melted a little around the edges and made room. When I got to the part where the left hand walks down, I felt the bench give a tiny thunk underneath me. I felt it in my hip more than I heard it. A hollow sound, like something had shifted that wasn't mine to move. I didn't stop. That was the whole trick. You keep going. You let the song do what your mouth can't. When the last note thinned out, the room made a sound too. A murmur, the scrape of breathing. I kept my hands on the keys until the quiet had its shape. I bought a copy of the will from the courthouse, I said softly, not looking back. And I brought receipts. After dinner. Dad laughed once, no humor. Mom pressed her lips together. Jenna rolled her eyes. That song, Aunt Carol said, a whisper like a hand brushing your hair behind your ear. Evie. I lifted my hands. Eat while it's hot, Dad said, his voice higher than it had been a minute ago. We'll talk later. We will, I said. We really will. Before it broke. The day Grandma put my hands on the keys, Brookfield smelled like cut grass and diesel. The high school baseball field flooded again, so the geese were on the sidewalk, honking at everyone like they owned the place. I was 9 and I had 2 missing teeth and a scab on my left knee that looked like Texas if you squinted. Grandma lived on a street where every house was built in 1959 and hired the same person to paint the porch columns white every 4 years, like it was part of the calendar. Her house had ivy that never quite succumbed to winter. She called it stubborn like it was a compliment. Inside, there was always a stack of sheet music on the piano and a book face down over the arm of the couch, and a tea mug with a lace of brown on the inside rim. You could find her by sound. The shuffle of slippers, the click of her nails on a glass, the low hum she didn't know she was making. Your hands don't actually have to be huge, she told me, tapping my knuckles. That's a myth. The music wants whatever hand it's given. I later learned from the internet that the piano began in Italy in the early 1700s, that it used to be called something like harpsichord with soft and loud, which made it sound like it didn't know yet what to be. I liked that. But in her living room, the piano just existed like a person in a house. It had a personality you didn't question. It demanded dusting and respect and sometimes a soft cloth on the keys because it was too cold in winter and the ivory could crack if you breathed on it wrong. I'm not going to make our house sound like it was a nightmare and hers like a movie. That would be easier, but it wouldn't be true. Our house smelled like laundry detergent and my mom's perfume and whatever my dad grilled on Sundays. There was always enough food, but never enough quiet. My dad's voice carried like a coach's whistle even when he was asking for salt, and my mom could make you feel like you were trying to ruin her day by having your own. Jenna was 6 when I learned my first scale, and she learned to skip counting to get a cookie. It wasn't her fault. She had big eyes and a high little voice and a habit of calling herself funny things like JJ and Jubble, and the name stuck to her like stickers. People gave her extra ketchup packets and compliments. I watched it like a weather pattern. The sky turned a different color when she entered a room. My dad loved us with verbs. He drove and bought and mowed and shouted at referees. When I won the school spelling bee in 5th grade, he told me it wasn't like I'd cured anything. He said this teasing, like it was a joke that landed funny, like so many of his jokes. When Jenna scored the winning goal in a scrimmage where they didn't keep score, he lifted her onto his shoulder until the coach told him to gently put her back down. It was what it was. I learned early the difference between attention and love. They grew side by side, but they weren't the same plant. At Grandma's, attention was quiet. It was sitting for 2 hours while my fingers tripped on a Mozart minuet, and she said, "Again, honey." And I did. It was a bowl of clementines peeled all the way in one perfect curlicue we weren't allowed to break. It was the way she asked about my science project and actually waited for the answer, which meant I had to figure out what I thought. She had a Baldwin Acrosonic spinet. I always thought it sounded like a rocket ship, and a dinosaur had only one name they had to share. I later learned our piano wasn't fancy, the way a Steinway is fancy. On Craigslist, someone would list it as vintage and their neighbor would say, "Good luck moving that thing." But it was ours, and the bass hummed deep when you hit a chord like a throat clearing before a song. The river waltz came later. First came scales like horizontal ladders I had to crawl because my hands weren't strong enough yet to run. Grandma could play anything. She had a way that made it sound like every note was apologizing to the next one for how pretty it was. I could see the songs in her face. She never closed her eyes. She paid attention to the world while she played. She noticed if the tea was boiling. By the time I reached middle school, I could play in front of other people without sweating through my dress. Not always, but sometimes. I wasn't brave. I was stubborn. Those aren't the same, but they feel like cousins. I practiced at Grandma's because our house was loud and my dad complained about repeats, and Jenna did elaborate dances to anything in 3/4 time that made me lose my place. At Grandma's, the piano spoke and we all listened. The river waltz arrived the year my mom stopped bringing casseroles to neighbors and started buying candles with words like serenity and sandalwood. She said a switch flipped in her. Maybe the house got quieter as we got older, and instead of filling it with television, she tried to fill it with a scent, and then she lit too many, and the living room smelled like a gift shop for a month until my dad said, "Enough," and she laughed and rolled her eyes at herself, but I watched a piece of her blink out like a light. In that same year, Grandma got an irregular heartbeat and made a joke about always having a rhythm. She started pausing at the end of the driveway before getting the mail, like she had to think about the distance before moving through it. She hid the worry by tucking it into chores. She pushed the vacuum slower. She wiped the counters longer, not because they needed it, but because it gave her something to hold. On a Thursday in late October, with leaves skittering like little red mice across her porch, she sat down at the piano and said, "I wrote something dumb. Want to laugh at me?" I nodded, and she played the first line. It sounded like the creek that pretended to be a river when it rained. It sounded like the way she said my name when she was teasing me, then not teasing. It sounded like steps down to a dock and silence that wasn't empty. "It's not dumb," I said, and she made a face like, "Don't argue." But I did, and we spent 3 weeks fussing with it, moving a note here and a phrase there until it was ours. She made me write it down, even though she knew I'd remember it better by heart. She made me write in pencil with eraser marks blackening the edges, because she believed in drafts like she believed in leaving the porch light on, just in case. A month later, her ankles swelled the way they do with heart failure, and her doctor put the word cardiomyopathy on a piece of paper for her like it would help to see the letters. She came home from the hospital smelling like iodine and something metallic, and in the middle of the night, she called to tell me she was fine in the way that told me she was not. I biked over the next morning and made her toast, and turned the coffee down when it boiled too hard. She put her hand on the piano and didn't sit. "You play," she said, and I did. The river waltz was as close as we got to hugging without making her feel like she was fragile. The thing about being a teenager in a town like ours is your life is made of practicalities wrapped in small dramas. Who is mad at who? What did the math teacher say that wasn't fair? Whose dad cheated on whose mom 15 years ago like a ghost we all agreed to ignore? Most days, the biggest problem is the timing of the school bus. But then some other things happen. They don't announce themselves. The phone rings too early. A grown-up uses a voice you don't recognize, one from the bottom of their throat. Suddenly there's a waiting room where time slides sideways. There are clipboards and questions and windows with views of brick walls that look like paper. The coffee is hot and bad and tastes like someone was trying to be helpful and failed. When Grandma was admitted to Summit Valley, I thought it was a pause. The doctors adjusted medications like knobs on a radio. They explained ejection fractions and fluid restriction and Lasix. They said words that sounded precise enough to be safe. They said, "We'll see." That's the sentence they teach you, for when you don't know. Jenna hated hospitals. She clutched my arm like she was falling, even when we were standing still. She was furious at the linoleum for being ugly. She asked the nurse what their problem was stocking the vending machine with only diet ginger ale and not normal. She said it like she cared about the injustice of it. You think I'm mocking her? I'm not. She really did care. Her anger was a way to stand up against the things she couldn't fight, which was a heart that didn't listen. Dad was all gestures. He brought a cooler with snacks no one wanted. He did crossword puzzles and announced the answers when he got them, like that made them right. Mom sat like someone trying to be very small and polite, a person who didn't want to ask for anything. When the doctor came in, she smiled with all her teeth and nodded even at the parts that didn't need nodding. Grandma asked me to bring the sheet music from her bench. I want to mark something, she said. I opened the bench and found the stack. Books with cracked spines, loose pages, a manila envelope with the flap sealed. I didn't open the envelope. It felt like breaking into her purse. I wish I could tell you I knew then, that I had an inkling. I didn't. I brought the books. I set them on her tray. I put the envelope underneath, like a secret made of paper. She tapped the top of the pile with her courteous knuckles and said, "There it is," like everything was where it should be. When they sent her home, the nurse gave me a pamphlet with bullet points and numbers to call. It had a page titled "When It's Time to Call," and I skimmed it, and then I read it, and then I memorized it. I moved into Grandma's house the way you move into a sweater you already wore in your head. I learned how to measure her weight at the same time every morning to check for fluid. I learned how to hear the difference between quiet breathing and struggle. I learned how to count pills into a weekly organizer and how to talk to the home health aide without apologizing for needing anything. I learned the alarm code because Grandpa had been the one to program it and hadn't quite gotten it right, so it chirped like a bird when you opened the front door, even if you disarmed it perfectly. I learned the sound of 2 a.m. in a house with one person who couldn't sleep. I played the piano, soft, after midnight. There's a way you can press the keys that is quiet, like whispering. The river waltz felt like the right shape for the night. It never gets old to me, the way a room warms when the right notes are in it. I don't want to make myself a hero. I wasn't. I went home some nights and cried in the shower until the water went cold. I looked for an off-ramp in stupid places, like scrolling real estate listings for cities I'd never visit, imagining a life where someone else had me, not the other way around. I slept in my own bed on weekends when Aunt Carol took over and pretended I wasn't listening for my phone to sing. When the end came, if you can call it an end, I've learned it's more like a flattening, a thinning out. It was a slow slide. She knew when she couldn't get enough breath to play even the first line of the river waltz. She let me help her bathe. She just nodded when I asked if she wanted more tea, and the way her head tilted was a yes and a goodbye. She died on a Tuesday morning in April, with the sunrise making her bedroom curtains blush. It felt indecently normal. The hospice nurse called it peaceful. I think peaceful is a word we use when we don't know another word that doesn't sound like a lie. It wasn't violent. It wasn't messy. It just was, and that almost felt worse. The funeral was 3 days later. Brookfield does funerals like it does snow. Everyone has their lane and their shovel and their casserole. People hugged me and said lines they'd learned from somewhere, and I stopped listening to the words and tuned in to the warmth of their hands, the press of cheekbones, the smell of cheap cologne and lipstick. After the service, at the house, the piano sat like a quiet person in a corner who knew better than to interrupt. People put their paper plates on the lid. I went around and moved them like a waitress. Jenna turned on a playlist and then turned it off, like she remembered too late that this wasn't a party. Dad started sorting within 48 hours. He said it was easier to rip the Band-Aid off. He stuck green tape on things that could go and blue tape on things that should stay, and the categories made a lot of sense except sometimes when they didn't. "Those quilts in the linen closet," he said, not asking. "We don't need all of them. The piano stays," I said, and he nodded like I'd said water was wet. "Of course," he said. "No one's talking about the piano." Then he checked the spine of a book, like it might change the subject for him. I believed him. In those first 2 weeks, I believe people more easily than I usually do. Grief does that. It makes you wave people through stop signs and trust them to break themselves. Mom put her hand on the piano with that skimming motion she had, not pressing, not leaving a mark, like she wanted to connect without committing to it. "Your grandmother had this since 1952, she said. I remember when the delivery boys had to pivot it through the door. They swore under their breath like they were being raided. I opened the bench that night to take home the sheet music, so it wasn't there for the next round of weird sorting decisions. The same manila envelope sat under the books, and for a second I felt the room tilt a fraction. Not like a warning, more like the shift of a ship when you pass another in the night. When I slid my hand under the stack, I felt the straight edge of the envelope and something like the echo of a heartbeat in my ear. I didn't take it. It felt like the opposite of courage, but I closed the bench and carried out the books. Grief did something to my sense of time. It stretched the afternoons like taffy and snapped the evenings to the next morning without the hours in between. People stopped calling after the second week. The shadow of the funeral lifted from the house and settled into all the drawers. Dad stopped coming by to sort. He said he'd been told to leave time for me. I didn't ask who told him that. Maybe he told himself. On a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the funeral exactly, because days have a way of repeating even when you aren't ready, Leo threw up in the passenger seat on the way to school. The smell was sour and familiar, but I told myself it was just a bad egg or nerves. He had a math test. He hated math tests. He hated bathrooms that smelled like soap and fear. He asked me not to tell Ms. Miles that he cried last time. I promised I wouldn't. By Wednesday, he had a bruise on his shin from nothing. By Friday, he was pale like the sun had been turned down on him without asking. I took him to our pediatrician, who said it very lightly. Let's run some blood work. When a doctor says, let's in that tone, your body hears it before your brain. I smiled with all my teeth, like my mother, and counted Jason Mraz posters on the wall while they filled vials with my kid's blood. The nurse spoke in a voice like a nest. Are we okay with needles, buddy? She said, and Leo said, no, but I can do it. That Tuesday was the last day anything was normal for a while. Pressure builds. The call came at 6:17 p.m. I know because in the months after, I saw the timestamp on my call log, and it felt like proof that something had a beginning, even if I didn't feel the end. Dr. Patel herself called, not the nurse, which told me everything without her having to say it. Her voice was careful, and she asked if I was sitting down, and I said yes, even though I wasn't. I stood at the window with my hand on the cool glass like I could lower the world's fever by touching it. We have some concerning results, she said. The phrase is a puzzle. You think you can argue with it, but you can't. She said, we need you to go to Summit Valley. Tonight. They're expecting you. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia has too many syllables, too many letters, like a bureaucratic errand you can't complete because you brought the wrong documents. They said it with care. They said it with a plan attached, and the plan was a rope. Chemo protocol, central line placement, a schedule printed in color, like we were planning an elaborate vacation without fun. Leo fell asleep in a plastic recliner a nurse rocked with her foot while she charted. He slinky-ed into my lap when they wheeled him to radiology. He looked smaller in a hospital, and I hated it because he was still the exact same size, but the machines made him look like a toy in a serious room. They put a port under his skin and explained how to keep it clean. A child life specialist came by with a basket and asked if he liked superheroes or animals better. Birds, he said, because when asked he always picked a third thing. She found a book on owls and showed him how the mask would smell like grape for a second and then nothing. I called my mom from the hallway and watched my face in the dark glass of the window. I could only see the outline of my mouth and my eyes like two moons. I told her the words and she said, oh, and then she said my name the way people say it when they're about to tell you a story about a time you were small and fell. Only this time you weren't going to get up. I'll come, she said. I'll be there in 20. She showed up with a tote bag full of nothing we needed and everything to make her feel like she had arrived prepared. Cheese crackers, a magazine about decluttering, lotion I had borrowed 12 times and always returned. Dad didn't come until the next morning with coffee and a solution. He asked about insurance like he was on hold with it inside his head. We'll figure it out, he said, and I wanted to believe him. I did, for a minute. He was good at plans when they were his plans. He was good at calling a thing what it wasn't and making you nod along. We settled into a routine measured in vitals checks and little cars drawn on whiteboards by nurses with unknown talents. There are such massively kind people in hospitals. Courage looks like a person who has seen 50 kids cry that week and still squats to eye level and says, is this okay? Like your kid's answer is the first one they've ever received. A social worker sat with me and outlined resources we could apply for. She said words like family leave and assistance and asked if there was anyone else who could help. The only person I could think of was my grandmother, and she wasn't a person I could put on the form anymore. I learned very fast that parenting a sick kid is logistics with a heartbeat. There are numbers to call and forms to fill and a language to learn about red blood cells that makes you feel like you're in school again, Only this time the test is a person you love. It is also unfairly laundry. The blood comes out of some fabrics, and it does not out of others. You learn which ones, and that feels like a piece of control. My parents hovered. My mom made a nest on the vinyl window seat and brought knitting she had never done before. She never completed a scarf because she was tense and pulled the yarn too tight, but her fingers had something to do. My dad brought information he skimmed from medical websites and highlighted like he was training for a degree he wouldn't be awarded. Jenna came once, stayed 17 minutes, posted a selfie from the hallway, and left with an excuse about planning her friend's bachelorette. She hugged Leo and then sanitized her hands like she was trying to undo it. I didn't judge her, even though you might want me to. She was 24, self-involved, not cruel. She was a person whose life had been arranged around her comfort, and hospitals are where comfort goes to be humbled. I went back to Grandma's house between chemo rounds when Leo could sleep, and the nurses took him for a walk that circled the ward twice and ended in a prize box. I watered the plants and checked the mailbox, like the house would think it had been abandoned otherwise. The piano waited with the lid closed, like a person who chose not to watch you undress. Dad started talking about the house in terms of assets within the first month. Your mom and I can't carry 2 mortgages, he said, as if someone had asked him to. The house was ours now, legally, but probate made everything feel like a suggestion. There was the will, and there were the feelings, and there was the ledger. There is always a ledger. We'll rent it, I said. We don't have to rush. He grimaced. Renters, he said, as if what he meant was rats. They never take care of things. I take care of things, I reminded him. I live here sometimes. You're different, he said, benevolent and dismissive in one breath. We should think strategically. Most of our conversations have been that shape since I was 14. It is amazing how you can be made to feel ungrateful for asking what was promised. I took the sheet music home, so I could play softly for Leo. Sometimes he asked for the river waltz, and sometimes he wanted nothing but silence broken by the squeak of his 4-pole as I walked it to the bathroom. I stood behind him while he threw up and rubbed his back in small circles and said, "You're okay," in a voice made of thread. On the 2nd month of treatment, insurance denied a medication because someone had filled out a line incorrectly. You wouldn't believe the way your tongue learns to sharpen when your child's meds are paused for 48 hours so they can fix the way a single letter is written. I could have cut paper with my words. I still try to be pleasant because it is drilled into you. That expectation, even in crisis, that you don't make a fuss. Here is something I learned in those months. You can be kind and also make noise. You can be respectful and say, "No. Fix it now." My dad offered to float me money for copays, and he said it like taking credit. The tone had a sting in it. The catch came late, as it always did. "We're in a tight spot," he said a week later, "between the house and helping Jenna with her program deposit." "What program?" I asked. "It's this incredible opportunity," Mom said, next to him, like a TV backing track. Seminar-based. She'll travel to 5 countries, study art history, and strengthen her resume. It's expensive, but you know how this is. Opportunities don't wait. I stared at their faces like they belonged to friendly strangers. I could not recognize how people who had sat in a children's hospital could ask me for understanding about a trip. "We were thinking," Dad began, and I saw the path before he finished. "If we sell the piano, we can shore up the house taxes and Jenna's deposit, and if anything's left, it can go toward your expenses." It was such a casual sentence, like we were dividing up leftovers. I felt my mouth go dry like chalk. "It's not yours to sell," I said. "Hannah." Mom pressed her fingers to her temple. "We're all in this together. Your grandmother would have wanted the family to benefit, not a piece of furniture collecting dust." "She wanted it to be played," I said. "No one plays it," Dad said, and something in me landed on that lie hard. I pictured the way my hand shook when I lifted the lid, the way the key with the chip clinked a little if you hit it too hard. I pictured Grandma's hand hovering over my elbow, like she could guide me without touching. I pictured Leo's face the last time I played. He had closed his eyes, which he never did, and smiled without showing his teeth. "Even if no one played it," I said, voice even. It's still not yours. It's noted in the will as part of the estate, Dad said. He sounded self-righteous and vague. It's not a combination you want to meet. Have you read the will? I asked. It's in process, he said, which is what people say when they are asking you to trust them. After that call, I sat on the floor of my kitchen and cried like a quiet person, which is to say my body made no sound, but my shoulders shook. After I was done, I dried my face, poured water for the plant my neighbor gave me so I wouldn't forget to drink, and called the clerk at the county courthouse. The woman on the phone spoke like someone who didn't have time to be mean. Yes, you can request a copy, she said. There's a fee. You can come in person or I can mail it. I'll come, I said, and Leo's nurse texted me to tell me he'd fallen asleep with his head in a book about owls, and it would be fine to leave for an hour. I used my half day of paid time off in a chunk, riding the elevator up in a building where the carpet always smells singed. The probate clerk printed the copy, logged it, and slid it across the counter like a sandwich I'd ordered. I read it sitting on a metal chair in the hallway with 2 dead plants flanking the water fountain like sentries. The words were ordinary. I leave this to I instruct in the event. The piano was in there. She named it, and then she named me. My breath made a sound I hadn't heard before, like it skipped and hiccuped. It didn't fix anything, but it was a hand on my back. It was a few dozen words from the person whose yellow cardigan still hung on the hook by the door, smelling like lemon. I made copies. I bought a red folder because that seemed like a thing you do when you're going to show something to people who won't want to see it. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my sister. I waited. It wasn't strategic the way my dad thinks strategy is a moral shape. It was patience like a muscle I hadn't used this hard before. 2 days later, Jenna posted a photo of a suitcase with a caption about manifesting and little airplane emojis. The comments were full of people clapping. She answered each one with 3 hearts. I put my phone down and watched a tiny spider try to climb up my curtain and slide back down. That night, Aunt Carol called me. She didn't chit-chat, which is how I always know when she's been thinking. I found something, she said. What? I asked, immediately leaning against the counter like that would keep me upright. When I was going through Evie's nightstand, she said. A letter. It's not addressed, but it's for you. I didn't open it. Where is it? I said. In my purse like it's cash, she said. I didn't want her dad to stick a label on it. She brought it over in a manila envelope, the same kind as the one in the piano bench. This one had a crease like it had been bent, and then flattened back out. She set it on my table with reverence, and I slid my finger under the flap and felt the paper give. I didn't read it yet. I don't know why. Maybe I did. Maybe I already knew what it said, and I couldn't let it be true just then. We ate microwave lasagna while Leo slept and tried to talk about anything else. We talked about the weather and how often you can repaint a porch before the wood stops caring. We talked about the way grief made everything louder and the way the pediatric oncology ward made you laugh at things that were so dark you felt like you should apologize after. She put her hand over mine without looking at it when I told her about the piano. They always did like things they could count, she said softly, meaning my parents, meaning maybe more than them. I have the will, I said. I wondered if you did, she said. They want to sell it for Jenna's trip, I said. Aunt Carol shook her head slowly. She looked away like she couldn't watch the words exist in the air between us. There's a dinner on Sunday, I said. Come. Is that wise? She asked. She wasn't patronizing. She had earned the right to ask me anything. No idea, I said. They're going to do it anyway if I'm polite and complain in private. She smiled at that, the kind where the corner of her mouth knows something. I'll wear my good pearls and not say what I'm thinking, she said. Until you ask me to. I propped the letter on the fridge with a magnet that says you are here with an arrow pointing to North Dakota because that's the kind of joke you buy when you feel lost and want to pretend it's on purpose. I thought about reading it every hour until Sunday. I touched the envelope like it might tell me through the paper. I folded laundry and emptied the trash and set my alarm and fell asleep with the picture of a chipped piano key in my head, shining like a small tooth. On Sunday, we drove to my parents' house. Leo watched the trees and asked me if birds get bored of flying. I told him sometimes, and that's why they sit on telephone wires and look like notes on a staff, and we liked that idea, that birds might be resting inside music. My mom had set the table with the good dishes and the centerpieces she got at Home Goods last fall, and never put away. It felt like any Sunday before anything bad had happened, except for everything that had happened. We ate. We pretended. Then I stood up and asked to play one song because people understand a request for a song. They don't understand a request for a war. I played, and the bench thunked, and something inside my chest folded and unfolded like a letter. I thought of all the times I had sat there as a kid, breathless with my own hands, and I knew we were past asking. We were in it now, me and the piano and the map on the wall, and the man with the knife pretending he didn't know what sacrifice looked like. I didn't have to make them good. I only had to be truthful. And afterward, when they wanted to move on like it was a performance we could applaud and then forget, I put my palms flat on my thighs and said, "I brought receipts." And the room shifted the way rooms do when someone finally says the thing. After the plates were pushed away and the air thickened with that half-done feeling that comes after a cooked meal, my dad stood up. He did it with a hand on the table like he needed leverage, like the gravity in the room was heavier for him than the rest of us. The pot roast had collapsed into itself. The carrots looked exhausted. Leo had given up on peas and was now using his fork to draw lines in the mashed potatoes that looked like the whitecaps of a tiny storm. "All right," Dad said, clapping his hands lightly like he was calling a meeting to order. "Let's be adults." Aunt Carol sipped water and didn't move. She had her purse on her lap, like she was in a waiting room. She didn't trust rooms like this to stay rooms. They turned into arenas too easily. I felt my pulse in my fingers. I could see the red folder in my bag in my head. Its edges were neat and straight. I imagined its calm. Jenna was on the far end of the couch, her phone face down as an act of virtue. Dad nodded toward the living room like the piano could hear him. "We've got an offer," he said. "Guy from a brew pub downtown wants to repurpose it for the new space. He loves the look, the whole mid-century vibe. Says it'll be the centerpiece." There it was. I tasted something bitter that might have been bile. "Repurpose," I repeated, quiet. Dad smiled like he'd sold something. "At least it'll be in a room that's full again. Music or not." I felt my mouth twist before I could stop it. There are times you know you're making a face and you don't care because if you tried to smooth it, something else would break. I pictured strangers setting drink glasses where my grandmother's hands used to rest, their condensation rings sticking, their laughter forgetting. I pictured a bar with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood, and people taking selfies in front of a piano that wasn't a piano anymore. "Dad," I said, "you can't sell it." He lifted a shoulder. "We've got to make choices, Han. We told you that. We can't keep a house full of things that cost money to look at." "It doesn't cost money to look at a piano," I said. "Taxes on the house? Utilities while it sits? Maintenance." He counted on his fingers like he was teaching me numbers. "This isn't about the piano. It's about what makes sense." Mom made a small noise in her throat like she tasted something sour and said quickly, "He's just saying we all have to be practical." Jenna sat up, leaning forward like she was starting a sprint. "My deposit is due tomorrow," she said. "I can't push it again. If we miss it, they'll give the spot to someone else, and I lose the scholarship." "What scholarship?" I said, not because I wanted to catch her, but because I wanted to understand. I had not heard the word scholarship until that second. She rolled her eyes. "It's not like it's partial, okay? But it helps. This is a program where alumni end up at publications and galleries and jobs that don't even list, you know? It's connections. It's my shot." "You're 24, I said. "You have 20 more shots." Her face shut down. "You know the way a window looks when the shades roll up?" I watched the opposite. "I knew you'd say that," she said. "Because you don't want me to go." "I don't want you to take the piano," I said. "There's a difference." Dad stepped into the middle of the room like a referee. "We can't let one person's preferences derail a plan that helps the whole family." "Preferences?" Aunt Carol asked very softly. "You could have missed it if you weren't listening for her." Dad blew out an impatient breath. "You know what I mean." She looked at him. not unkindly.
No.
I don't.
Clarify.
He glanced at me like he wanted to signal something, then thought better of it. His shoulders squared. We are drowning in bills, he said. Your mother and I are bailing as fast as we can. Between maintaining Evie's house and helping both our daughters and everything with Leo, it's a lot. There was the shift. I felt it. He moved us from the piano to Leo in one sentence, and I felt my spine harden to keep me from taking the bait. You said you'd help with co-pays, I said. You offered. And we are, he said, in spirit. In spirit, I repeated, and Aunt Carol's small water glass made a little click as she set it down. My mom was rearranging spoons that no one would use. We need to hold the big picture, she said. We can't revolve around one crisis forever. I stared at her. The words hit me like a door that swings unexpectedly into your shoulder. It didn't hurt badly. It hurt in that way that makes you take stock of your own balance. Mom, I said. It's not a crisis to him. It's his life. She flushed, pink rising in her cheeks like a confession. That's not what I meant. It's what you said, Aunt Carol murmured. Jenna exhaled heavily. Everyone's always so careful around you now, she said to me, fast defense first. Like we can't ask for anything because of everything. And then you get to act like we're monsters for wanting to live our lives. Leo looked up then because his name hadn't been said, but it had been implied. He glanced between us with the kind of alert stillness I hate seeing in a kid. He had developed radar. No one should have to have radar at 7. You're not monsters, I said. You're just wrong. Dad lifted his hands. Jesus, Hannah. Aunt Carol coughed once, firm, like she was clearing more than her throat. He recalibrated. For crying out loud, he said. We have to make decisions. We can't keep a shrine, babe. He looked at my mom when he said babe, but he meant me. The word clicked into place with the brew pub and the deposit, and the way my mom's eyes had flicked to the map on the wall with the red pins. It was starting to feel like the piano was a symbol to them, and to me, it was a person. If you want to talk about shrines, Aunt Carol said, dry, we can discuss that map. Mom frowned. What's wrong with the map? Nothing, Carol said. If you like to stare at places you haven't paid for yet. Dad's tone sharpened. What exactly are you implying? Aunt Carol didn't blink. I'm implying you put a pushpin in Portugal before you asked for a signature. What signature? I said, before I could stop myself. Dad shifted his weight. That is how you know you've hit something. He spreads his feet when he's lying or getting ready to. Everything is lined up, he said too quickly. I scheduled movers for Tuesday at 10. If I tell the guy no now, we lose the deposit. My heartbeat tripped, then steadied. He had jumped, so I knew where the ground was. You scheduled movers, I said. I kept my voice as flat as I could. The room wobbled like a heat mirage and then cleared. He held my gaze. We're not children, he said. We can't wait on someone playing one last song. I said after dinner. I said. I was surprised at my own calm. I brought the will. We don't need to read the will to know what's fair, he said. He had practiced that sentence in his head. He liked the ring of it. Jenna's voice floated in, softer but pointed. It's just a piano. I looked at her, and the sadness rose greased and unstoppable. It's never just anything, I said. That's what you don't get. She flinched. I don't think she meant to. Something I said found a bruise I didn't know she had. You're not the only one who lost her, she said. I nodded. That I could agree with. Then don't try to erase her. Mom stood up, napkin in hand. She touched the back of a chair like it would hold her up. This doesn't have to be a fight, she said. We can solve it. We need you to be reasonable. There it was. The word reasonable. I had been given reasonable as a gold star, and as an insult my whole life. It depended on what you refused to be. I thought of the bench under me earlier, the tiny thunk I felt in my hip. I thought of the manila envelope on my fridge. I thought of the red folder in my bag. I looked at Leo, and the way his face had gone careful. That's when the line slid under my feet like a tripwire. Dad squinted, his voice low. And you need to stop using his illness like a shield every time you on your way. The room froze. I felt my ears start to ring and then go silent, like a curtain dropped. The only thing I heard was the ridiculous tick of the oven cooling in the kitchen, the way metal talks to itself when the heat leaves. "Say that again," Aunt Carol said, and it sounded like the first time she had been truly angry since 1998 when our neighbor backed into her mailbox and laughed. Dad looked instantly sorry, which is not the same thing as being sorry. He put his palms up. "I didn't mean it like that," he said. "I meant, we can't let one thing dictate everything." "You mean one person?" I said. "You mean Leo?" "No," he insisted, but there was a crack in it. "I mean, this is unsustainable." "You're right," I said. My voice surprised me. It had steel in it I don't usually wear. "This is unsustainable, which is why we're going to change it." He shifted his weight again. "After coffee," I said. "We'll sit down. I'll show you what I brought. You can decide if you want to keep pretending this is about being reasonable or if you want to do what's right and what's legal." The last word landed like a coin in a jar. He heard it. My mom glanced at him. Jenna stared at me like she couldn't believe I said it out loud. Aunt Carol's mouth tightened in a way I recognized as approval. Leo whispered, "Can I have ice cream?" And the relief was ridiculous that he gave us a small thing to do. "Yes," I said. "Please." The plan or the breaking point. I had not walked into that house hoping to be saved by a song. I was sentimental, and I did it on purpose, but I'm not naive. I learned in hospitals that feelings are just one part of a plan. You still have to sign forms and take temperatures and label everything with a Sharpie because the laundry all looks the same when it's not yours. I made a plan on Tuesday with a yellow notepad and the voice of a legal aid attorney in my ear. Her name was Mara. She was the kind of calm that makes you cry a little because it sounds like a person who has watched a lot of people not drown. "I can't give you formal representation without intake," she'd said over speakerphone while I balanced the line between the microwave and the wall by my kitchen table, and Leo built an owl out of Legos. "But I can tell you the categories. The piano is a specific bequest if it is named in the will. That means the executor must deliver it to the person named, regardless of what they want to do with the rest of the estate. They cannot sell it to satisfy other debts unless the estate is deeply insolvent and there are no other assets." "Are there other assets?" "There's the house," I'd said. "There's some savings. There are her quilts and antique teacups if we start getting ridiculous." "Specific bequests come first," she said. "If they attempt to sell, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. You can file for injunctive relief. You can call the police if they physically attempt removal. They may tell you it's a civil matter, but show them the document. Ask them to keep the peace. Most officers prefer not to be in the middle. They'll encourage everyone to step away." I wrote down phrases like breach of fiduciary duty and felt like I was dressing up in a grown-up costume. I underlined ask them to keep the peace because it's the kind of sentence that might keep you from losing your own. "Change the locks," she said. "You're allowed to secure property that is yours, assuming you have a key or lawful access. Are you on the deed?" "I'm not," I said. "Yet. Is anyone living in the house?"
"No."
"Okay," she said. "Call a locksmith.
"Keep receipts."
Let the executor know in writing that the piano is a specific bequest and you are securing it to prevent breach. CC Aunt Carol if she's a named beneficiary." "She is," I said.
"Good," she said.
"Have someone with you when you deal with your father. You need a witness. And make a habit of emailing him a summary after you talk. Paper trails are your friend." I wanted to lie down on the floor and become paper. I wanted to be a thing you could fold and store and retrieve without having to feel anything. I called a locksmith named Eric who smelled like cigarettes and fabric softener. He changed the front and side and looked at me like he knew why. He tested each lock 3 times and then wrote the code down on an index card like he was taking notes in school. I wrote a letter.
It wasn't fancy.
It said, "Dear Thomas and Margaret, please be advised that pursuant to Article 3 of Evelyn's last will and testament, the Baldwin acrosonic spinet located at her residence is specifically bequeathed to me. As such, it is not an asset available to satisfy other estate obligations. Any sale or attempted sale would be a breach of fiduciary duty. I have secured the piano to prevent loss and will arrange for delivery upon conclusion of probate or earlier by mutual agreement. Please direct any inquiries regarding this property to me. All other estate administration can proceed in the normal course. Sincerely, Hannah. I sent it certified mail because Mara told me to. She said, don't text them. I asked why, even though I knew why. Because texts make everyone dumb, she said wryly. And you'll say something you can't unsay. I installed a doorbell camera because those things are cheap now, and sometimes you don't need security so much as you need accountability. The camera made a little chime that sounded like a fairy dinging a spoon on glass. I felt ridiculous and empowered, which is not a combination I mind. I called the program Jenna wanted to join. The website was all curves and beaches and testimonials with just enough detail to sound real. I asked a simple question. Is this accredited through university? The person on the phone was charming and used the word experiential a lot. I read the refund policy out loud while he talked. Written in dense, cheerful font, deposits become non-refundable at midnight on the day before departure. We had time. We weren't up against an actual clock. We were up against a story in my parents' heads. I sat with the piano twice the week before Sunday dinner because I needed to touch it to remember I wasn't arguing about an idea. It had dust in the tiny crevices where the wood meets the metal. There were fingerprints on the fallboard only I could see. The second night, I opened the bench to move the metronome to my bag because sometimes I still like the tick. Under the stack of books, the manila envelope slid. It had that weight to it like there was more than paper inside. I put my hand on it and thought of the envelope in my kitchen. I didn't open this one either. I could hear my grandmother's voice in my head. Timing, she had said once when I wanted to play something too fast. You rush and it sounds like you're hunting the end. I wrote on my yellow pad, do not hunt the end. I printed the will, the page that mattered, highlighted the sentence with my name. I printed a screenshot of a Facebook marketplace listing my friend Katie forwarded me because she had a hawk's eye for my parents' schemes online. The listing had used a photo of the piano I had taken years ago for a school project. I knew it was mine because you could see the corner of my Converse in the reflection on the mahogany, a mistake I had always liked. The post said, Baldwin Acrosonic Spinet. Vintage. Good condition. Needs tuning. $1,200 OBO. U-Haul. Needs tuning. I said out loud at my own kitchen table. U-Haul. I wanted to fling the paper at the wall like it would stick there. I printed the refund policy from the program page and circled the last date in red ink like I was a teacher grading a test. I printed the email from the probate clerk acknowledging receipt of the will copy request. I printed the letter I sent my parents certified. I clipped it all together with a metal clamp that felt satisfyingly stern. I put it in the red folder and put that in my bag. I packed the manila envelope Aunt Carol had given me too, folded gently so it wouldn't crease more. I didn't open it.
Do not hunt the end.
I wrote bullet points on an index card like a temp in a meeting I wasn't getting paid to attend. It is mine per will. Show document. Stop talking. Mover scheduled. Not happening. Program refund policy. Deposit not at risk. Legal plan. Injunction Monday, if necessary. Locks changed. Camera installed.
Keep voice calm.
Let them say the most. Don't interrupt. No is a complete sentence. I put the card in my back pocket where I could feel it when I sat, like a stick in a tent holding the structure up. Then I practiced. Not the will part.
The song.
Because I wanted to remind myself why I was fighting. You don't fight for paper. You fight for what the paper holds. I played the river waltz with the left hand a hair slower than Grandma would have liked, and the right hand like it remembered. When I got to the walk down, the bench thunked again, the same hollow knock under me. It felt like a heartbeat and a door. On Sunday, I washed my face like I was going to a job interview. I put on a clean sweater and applied mascara for the first time in weeks. It was probably the silliest part of the plan. I wanted to look like someone more than tired. Leo put on his blue hoodie with the fox ears because he said foxes run fast, and he wanted me to be fast if I needed to be. I won't run, I told him, but I have to be quick with words. He nodded like he had ever doubted that. He took my hand, and we walked into the house where I had learned to be small and then learned to be exact. After the song and the carrots and the mash and the map on the wall with red pushpins, and after my dad crossed the line and said the part you say in your head out loud, I made coffee because it gave my hands something to do. I poured too quickly and spilled a little and wiped it up and took a breath and went in my bag. The red folder felt heavier than paper. I held it close without meaning to. I didn't want to treat it like a weapon. I wanted to treat it like a seatbelt. Okay, I said, setting it on the table. Let's try the version of this where we don't lie. No one moved for a second, like I had frozen them. Then Aunt Carol smiled without showing teeth and folded her hands like she had arrived at church and found the right pew. Not church. Not that. Like she had arrived at a place with rules and decided she could follow them. Dad pulled out a chair but didn't sit. He stood with his hands on the back like he was about to move it. Jenna stayed perched on the couch arm like a bird deciding whether to fly. Mom wiped an invisible crumb off the table 4 times in the same spot and then stopped. Leo took his bowl of ice cream to the piano bench and sat, his legs not reaching the floor. He set the bowl carefully on the left side of the bench where the cushion was thinnest and kept his spoon in his mouth even when it was empty. I opened the folder. The clip made a satisfying sound when I released it. I placed the will on top because that's what you do, you start with the part that isn't an opinion. I went to the courthouse, I said. I didn't trust anyone to tell me what it said. So here. I slid the page across the table toward my dad because I knew he wanted to be the person who read it. I could have held it up and read it out loud and been dramatic. But what I needed was for him to hold it and feel the weight of any paper that wasn't his. He took it without touching me and scanned the page the way he read baseball box scores, eyes quick, not landing long, impatient for the names that mattered. His mouth tightened when he found it. I didn't have to say a word. The sentence hung between us, black ink on white paper, a fact that didn't care about his tone. My mom leaned in. She read slower. You could see her lips move the way we all do sometimes when we forget people can see us reading. When she reached my name, she looked up like she'd just noticed me standing in the room. It's specific, she said. She sounded surprised, like she expected it to be vaguer, something she could interpret. She named the model. Evie was precise, Aunt Carol said. She didn't have to add, you should know that. Dad set the page down like it was fragile. Wills can be contested, he said. He said it immediately. He said it because he needed to have a next sentence. On what grounds? I asked. I sat down then because my legs were tired of being brave. He gestured at the room in a sweeping motion that made no sense. She was old. So am I, Aunt Carol said, deadpan. She had an irregular heartbeat, not a brain issue, I said. If you'd like me to call her cardiologist and have them write a letter that says an ejection fraction is not a judge of mental competence, I can do that. You don't have to get smart, Dad said, and I almost laughed because I didn't know how to get any other way at that moment and have it work. I'm not getting smart, I said. I'm being clear. I slid the certified letter copy across next. This is the letter I sent you both on Thursday. You'll get the hard copy tomorrow, but I wanted you to see it. Dad read the first line and then flipped it face down like it might burn him. Mom read all of it and whispered, breach of fiduciary duty, like she was trying out new words. Jenna stood up like she might leave and then sat back down with her head tilted to one side, her hair making a curtain like she used to do when she was little and wanted to hide. You can't just say legal words, Dad muttered, but it didn't sound strong. It sounded like someone who tripped and then kept walking fast so you would notice. I also changed the locks, I said. It's secured. I can't stop you from walking into the house with a locksmith and breaking your way in. I can only tell you what will happen if you do. It's on the doorbell camera. And I will call the police to keep the peace and bring the document. I put my hand on the will, not in a dramatic gesture, just like it was a napkin I was smoothing toward me. Jesus, Hannah, Dad said under his breath, then checked himself and shook his head like he could shake off the word. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with me is that I watched you put a price tag on the only thing that held us together when I was 9, I said. And you didn't ask. You just scheduled a mover. You weren't using it, he said. I wasn't using it when I asked quiet. When Grandma was alive and wanted to hear me. When I was in the hospital and playing it in my head, so my hands didn't shake while they started in 4 on your grandson. When I came here tonight and played the song she wrote for us because I needed you to feel something besides a pushpin. No one answered. I reached into the folder again. Katie sent me this, I said, laying down the printed marketplace listing. The photo glared up at us. My own shoes smirked in the reflection, that little mistake that felt like a date stamp. You used my photo, which is poetic, if you like that kind of thing. Dad cursed softly, a word he wouldn't have said when I was a kid. He touched the page with one finger like he was checking for wet ink. I was going to talk to you, he said. When? I asked. When the brewpub guy was unscrewing the fallboard so he could hang it on a wall. When the movers were asking where to put it in the truck. We need the money, he said again. He had dwindled down to that sentence, and I almost felt sorry for him because he had once been able to sell a snowblower in July. Then sell something that isn't illegal for you to sell, I said. Sell the maple headboard from the guest room. Sell the set of golf clubs you never use. Sell your old model car kits. Sell the jukebox you bought on eBay because you thought jukeboxes were cool, and then it turned out it only plays one song, and it's a bad one. Sell your pride. His head jerked up at that, and for a second his face was the one from when I was 15 and slammed a door. Hannah, my mom warned, and I caught my breath because she said my name like she was going to call me back to being a child, and I almost let her. Almost. Now, I said, evenly, we can also talk about the program. Jenna made a sound like a laugh, and a gasp colliding. I called them to ask about accreditation, I said, and she sat very still. Experiential is a word they like. It doesn't mean anything. The deposit is refundable until the day before you leave. That's in their own policy. I printed it. I slid it across the table. She didn't take it. It's not refundable, she said. Automatic. It is, I said. Until midnight the night before. You said your deposit was due tomorrow. What is due is your decision, not the money. It'll never be the right time for me to go, she said, and her voice faltered. I knew you'd find a way to make me feel selfish. I don't have to make you feel anything, I said gently, which is somehow the meanest thing I have said in a long time. You do that by yourself. She blinked hard. I saw her as a kid, as the girl who used to try to crawl into my bed when she had nightmares, clutching my wrist with her sticky hand, who always got second helpings, who was loved, who was not equipped for not getting what she wanted. If you want to go in 6 months, go, I said. Raise the money.
Work.
Apply for scholarships that aren't quotes. Ask your friends who eat appetizers under Edison bulbs to buy one less and put it in your fund. I will even help you write your application essays. I'm good at words. But you're not going to turn our grandmother's piano into a bar fixture to make a story better to tell. She swallowed and looked at the map on the wall, and then at me, and then at the piano. Her eyes landed on Leo, who had chocolate on his upper lip, who was scraping the last of the ice cream into his mouth with dedication. This isn't about the piano, she said, but her voice was quieter now, as if she wasn't sure anymore. It's exactly about the piano, I said. And everything it holds. And the fact that you had months to talk to me and you didn't. You chose to announce. You chose to push. You chose to risk the thing I can't unrisk if you take it out of that door. There was a long rectangle of silence. You could have set a cake pan on it. My dad sighed. His shoulders dropped. He picked up the will again and glanced at the sentence like maybe it had changed in the last 2 minutes. It had not. This is hospital brain, he said. He tried for charm and settled on condescension. You're tired. You're in fight mode. You don't realize what you sound like. What do I sound like? I asked.
Punitive, he said.
And selfish. I sat back. I let the word selfish roll around and hit the teeth of my skull. I let it sting, and then I let it go. No, I said. I sound like your daughter, who learned to say no the hard way. I sound like the executor you should have been. You want the list? Here's what I'm willing to do. The day probate is done, or sooner if the clerk allows, I will have the piano moved to my house by a professional who will treat it like an instrument, not a prop. Until then it stays where it is, locked. You don't enter that house without me or Aunt Carol. If you want to sell the jukebox, I'll help you move it. If you want to keep the house, we can rent it to a responsible tenant and keep the piano safe in the room with the door that closes. If you sell the house, we move the piano first. If you try to sell the piano, I file for an injunction on Monday morning. If you enter without me, I call the police to keep the peace. If you try to use a locksmith to force the door, the camera will catch it, and we will let a judge decide how sweet you were being. He stared at me. My mother stared at him. Jenna stared at the map some more. Aunt Carol stared at the will, as if she were memorizing it in case it dissolved. You think you're better than us, Dad said. Not the worst thing he has said to me in my life, but the one that cut in a new place. No, I said. I think I am better at this than you. What is this? Being the one who is disliked, I said. And living with it. He looked genuinely puzzled by that, like disapproval was a thing other people had to carry. Honey, Mom said, switching to a tone she used when we were little and a neighbor boy was mean. Can we not? Can we not make this ugly? It already is ugly, I said. You made it ugly when you scheduled a mover without calling me. I didn't think, she said. She looked ashamed, but it was that slippery shame that doesn't stick. You did think, I said. You chose. Aunt Carol shifted in her seat, the pearl studs she had promised glinting in the light from the lamp. If it helps, she said, her voice steady. Evie told me the week before she died that she wanted the piano with Hannah.
She was precise, Tom.
Don't insult her by pretending she forgot what words mean.
Dad's jaw worked.
He looked more tired than angry now. There is a stage of these fights where the person you're fighting runs out of steam and starts to see themselves reflected. It is not always a good thing. People break themselves against it or look away. He picked up the marketplace printout and read the caption, squinting as if the letters were small. He looked at the price he had set. He opened his mouth and then closed it like a fish making a point. Evan's a good guy, he said eventually. He'll understand if we change our mind. Not Evan's call, I said. Yours. Mine, he repeated, and I couldn't tell if the word made him feel big or small. Yours, I said again. And I'm asking you to decide whether your pride is worth breaking the law and your daughter. The house answered for a second with its little settling noises. The refrigerator hitch, the heater rattle. Leo sucked on his spoon and let it clink down against the bowl. Dad rubbed his face, smearing the welt where his glasses had dug into his nose. He exhaled like a person who'd just been told a medicine he didn't want to take was the only thing that would work. Fine, he said, in a voice I had to lean in to hear. The movers are canceled.
The post is gone.
Jenna. He turned toward her like he needed a new problem to solve. We'll figure something else out. She shook her head and cried, not loud, quietly, the way you cry when you're embarrassed about crying but can't stop. It hit me in the sternum like a stone. I wanted to go to her. I didn't. Leo got off the bench and came over, small and sure, and handed her a folded napkin. He stood near her knee, like a little fence. He didn't touch her. He just existed next to her sadness, and for a second the room softened. I'm not trying to ruin your life, I said into that softer space. I know, Jenna said, and she did, I think, for the first time. It just feels like you are the one with a thing that matters. And I am the one with this map. I looked at the wall, and then at the piano, and then at my bag where the manila envelope waited. Maps can change, I said. Pianos can't. That's the point. Mom stood up with the plates. We should clean up, she said briskly, which is what she says when she needs to put a lid on a day. Dad nodded once and pushed the wool back toward me with his fingertips. Take that, he said, like it was a thing that could leak. Lock it up. I slid it back into the folder. I did not hunt the end. I didn't pull the manila envelope from my bag. I didn't read the words that might have been love in my grandmother's handwriting. I would later. For now, I only wanted to get my kid home and sit with the feeling of a boundary holding like a good dam. We put leftovers in tubs and snapped the lids on and washed the dishes that could be washed by hand. Jenna wiped her eyes and then wiped the counter. Dad glowered at the map like it had misled him. Mom tucked her hair behind one ear and said 3 times, "We'll figure it out," as if repeating it made it live. Aunt Carol took the garbage out without being asked. She came back in and went to the piano and lifted the fallboard and set it gently back down like she was closing eyelids. When she passed me, she leaned in and whispered, "Tomorrow. Read it." I nodded. Leo yawned hugely, fox ears twitching, and I helped him put his coat on. He pressed his hand flat for the goodbye game he and my dad had played since he was a baby. Palms together, push, then release. Dad looked surprised and relieved to be included in a ritual that didn't cost him anything but softness. He pressed back. He released. We left. The night was cold enough to make your breath visible. Leo said, "Do you think Grandma would have liked me eating ice cream on her bench?" And I said, "She loved when anyone enjoyed anything like it was the last bite." He said, "So yes," and I said, "So yes." When I got home, I put the red folder on the dining table and the manila envelope next to it. I made tea I didn't drink. I put Leo to bed with the owl book. I cleaned the one corner of my kitchen that always gathers crumbs. I sat. I listened to my radiator hiss and think. Then I picked up the envelope and slid my finger under the flap.